Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining me again on the program. I'm Amarachi Ubani. This week, we're taking a closer look into South African President Cyril Ramaphosa's visit to the UK, the first state visit for King Charles III, and one characterized with all of the markings of a really special visit in which we saw working members of the royal family get fully involved. What did President Ramaphosa get out of the meeting, and what precedents is it set for the rest of Africa under King Charles III? Well, those are some of the questions I posed to now Director of the African Center for the Study of the United States at the University of Pretoria in South Africa, Professor Christopher Isike. Professor Isike is also Professor of African Politics and International Relations in the Department of Political Sciences, also at the University of Pretoria. We'll also review developments in Russia's so-called military operation in Ukraine the week gone by. And that's Diplomatic Channel in a wrap. Now, as usual, let's check in on other discussions in diplomatic circles.
The people of Congo, resident in Nigeria, protested the killing of about 10 million of their people in the Central African country. The protest began at Faloma under the Ikoyi Bridge, to the French consulate in Lagos, and to the UN office in Ikoyi. Armed with placards with varying inscriptions protesting the killings resulting from years of war in the DRC, they accused the international community of being silent despite the many atrocities being committed in Congo. Being a peaceful protest, they handed a letter conveying more of the group's grievances to representatives of the UN and the French consulate, who came out to receive them. Meanwhile, back in the DRC, hundreds marched in the city of Goma, protesting against an agreement between the African leaders to stop attacks by M23 rebels, saying it does not tackle Rwanda's alleged backing of the group. The Tutsi-led M23 group is waging its most serious offensive in eastern Congo since 2012, further destabilizing an area where armed groups have wrangled. The resurgence in fighting has caused a diplomatic rift with neighboring Rwanda, which Congo accuses of backing the group. Rwanda denies this. According to the protesters, their accords and summits are of no interest to them. All they want is peace and security. The march ended at the French and British consulates, where they read out a memorandum asking foreign powers to sanction Rwanda and Uganda for their alleged involvement with the M23. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un says his country's ultimate goal is to possess the world's most powerful nuclear forces, as he promotes dozens of military officers involved in the recent launch of the country's largest ballistic missile. The announcement came as leader Kim inspected a test of the country's new Hwasong-17 intercontinental ballistic missile and pledged to counter U.S. nuclear threats with nuclear weapons on November 18. State media released photographs of the leader and his daughter posing for photos with scientists, engineers, military officials, and others involved in the test. Kim says he expects them to continue to expand and strengthen the country's nuclear deterrent at an extraordinarily rapid pace.
The South African President Cyril Ramaphosa arrived in the UK on Tuesday to traditional British pomp and ceremony at Buckingham Palace. There were gun salutes and a ceremonial welcome from King Charles III and his wife Camilla, the Queen Consort, before a grand carriage procession along the Mall to Buckingham Palace. President Ramaphosa later enjoyed the King's company as an exhibition of royal collection artworks related to South Africa, as well as photographs of royal visits to the country, including of Queen Elizabeth II meeting Nelson Mandela. They were also joined by Britain's new Prince and Princess of Wales, as well as South African dignitaries. President Ramaphosa had been greeted by the Prince and Princess at a central London hotel ahead of a banquet in the President's honour on Tuesday evening.
Turn on the sunshine for you.
Thank you so much.
At the banquet, the King spoke about both countries working together and tackling great challenges.
It is only by working together across our countries and our generations that we will tackle some of the greatest challenges of our times. For instance, our collaboration in science and innovation is literally vital in order to protect our people's health by preparing for future pandemics. Perhaps, above all, We must find and implement practical solutions to the twin existential threats of climate change and biodiversity loss.
His words were echoed by President Ramaphosa.
In times of uncertainty and instability, a relationship such as ours is particularly important. We are urged and, in a way, compelled by our common commitment to peace, stability, democracy, and shared prosperity to work together to overcome the difficulties of the present and prepare ourselves for the challenges of the future.
The South African president also visited a memorial stone in honor of former President Nelson Mandela and laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown warrior. On the sidelines of his visit was a meeting with British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak at number 10 Downing Street, and a meeting with the UK's Foreign Minister James Cleverly, where they both discussed climate change, energy security and other issues. They will later announce a new health and science partnership covering vaccine manufacturing, genome sequencing, climate change and other areas. South Africa remains Britain's strongest trading partner on the continent. President Ramaphosa also visited the Royal Botanic Gardens with Prince Edward.
And she's a very noted, prolific, great English Victorian.
And after a packed two-day visit, President Ramaphosa and King Charles bid farewell. Amidst the shaking of hands, the walks along the garden and the state banquet, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa got to sealing some new deals to boost economic and better improve diplomatic relations with the UK. President Ramaphosa, it seems, ended his visit on a high note. Joining me now is Professor Christopher Isike. He's Director of the African Center for the Study of the United States in the University of Pretoria, South Africa. He's also a professor of African politics and international relations, also at the University of Pretoria. Professor Isike, thank you for making time to be with us today.
Good day to you, and thank you for having me on your show.
Let's begin with the visit of the South African president to the King of England, the new King of England this week, or last week, I beg your pardon. It was the King's first state visit, and then he rolled out an impressive welcome for President Ramaphosa. What does that say about relations between both countries?
Well, it says a lot. Royal visits are the highest honor bestowed on a country by the United Kingdom. In furtherance of bilateral relations and as a symbol of respect and of the importance that the UK ascribes to its relations with a particular country that it invites, for royal state visits. Now, in this case, as you have said, it rolled out an impressive welcome for President Ramaphosa, and the outcomes were, significant for South Africa, even though the opposition roundly criticized the visit both from an ontological and colonial points of view.
And it's been a long time since any member of the royal family visited South Africa. In fact, I think the last time we remember was of the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh in 1995, when Nelson Mandela was still president. And then the Queen died. You saw the mixed reactions in South Africa. Are relations really smooth between both countries?
Well, it depends. From the state-to-state level, relations between the UK and South Africa are on good footing. So, for example, bilateral relations between both countries have grown, since 1994 into, strategic development partnerships, as reflected in substantial bilateral, trade relations between them. But at the people level, the story is a bit different. So South Africa is a diverse nation with different segments of the population, including a vibrant civil society playing active roles in foreign policy. So, for example, amongst the Black majority Black population, there is a growing anti-West sentiment, which countries such as the UK and the United States, for example, suffer from because they are considered to be the faces of the West. Then you have political opposition parties to the ruling ANC, such as the Economic Freedom Fighters, the AFF, that latch on these sentiments to oppose government's foreign policy positions and actions with the UK, while the official opposition party, the Democratic Alliance, is more sympathetic to the UK given their historical ties. And then there's also civil society and business that are more measured in what they pursue, depending on their interests. So what you have is a potpourri of reactions which have both good and bad outcomes for the ruling party. So it depends on how you're looking at the relations between both countries, whether at the state-to-state level or people-to-people level.
Let's take a look at the state-to-state level. What is that like? Because the UK refers to South Africa as its largest trading partner in Africa. I mean, Nigeria could dispute that because we consider the UK one of our really important partners, right?
Well, it depends. For example, like apart from what you mentioned, concerning bilateral relations, this particular visit had very positive outcomes for South Africa in terms of bilateral agreements that support economic growth and development in South Africa, in terms of infrastructural development in the mining and energy sector, in manufacturing, agro processing, business process outsourcing, tourism, and of course climate transition, which was also part of the fallout from the COP27 in Egypt. So they have very, very strong relations, although there are tensions here and there, as is usually the case. For example, there was this case of an airline in the UK subjecting Black South Africans to, extra visa requirements and checks, which was not, given to white South Africans. And the South African government, pushed back against that very strongly, and that was, rescinded. So these incidents do occur, but I dare say that at the state-to-state level, relations between both countries are cordial.
And what I did talk about, Nigeria being number 2 trading partner for the UK, I'm sure a lot of people are surprised about that. International media never failed to mention that throughout the week, as they reported on the visit by President Ramaphosa. Well, keeping that in mind, though, do you think that, this visit does set the tone for UK-Africa relations? And do you think also that the African presidents would also be given the same kind of treatment, or would it be based on, where they are in the pecking order for the UK government? Would they also be receiving the same receptions and given accorded the same cordialities, as they have to South Africa?
Well, of course, look, you've said it all. There's a pecking order. The kind of reception any state in Africa will get from the UK will be based on on what the UK stands to gain from relations with such a country. And this is common practice because all states act of their national interest. Now, Africa has again, like during the Cold War era, become the darling bride of world powers because of its material and human resources. But this time it is in a multipolar world. So we have more than the US and USSR, which we had during the Cold War bipolar world period. Today, there is China, there is the European Union, there is, the UK, all of them renewing interest in Africa. And even Australia, that has never looked at Africa in this light, is beginning to make inroads into expanding relations with the continent. The question really for me will be whether Africa will be ready for this onslaught of friends, in quotes, who seek to advance their own interests, above ours. But it will just be really dependent on what the UK seeks to get from you at a particular point in time, because these things also change.
Do you think that could also be influenced by, the war in Ukraine? I mean, we've seen countries in Europe looking to energy resources outside of the continent, but not really focused on Africa, though. I mean, there have been a few visits. We've seen the French president visit. We've seen the Russian foreign minister also visit. But do you really think that, countries like the UK are really looking towards Africa for help in that regard?
Well, yeah, the UK is going to increasingly look to Africa, following its exit from the European Union, and Africa, is the next destination, point in terms of not just its young population, but also in terms of its vast mineral resources. So yes, the UK would look to Africa. They would look to partner Africa in terms of the oil and energy, clean energy, as well as other areas where that they think they will benefit and they will have new markets. So it's going to be a return to classic UK interest in exploiting African markets and economies for their benefit. So the UK will not do anything for Africa unless it will also benefit. So what this means is that African states must start getting their acts together, study the United Kingdom the way that they've studied us, so that we can develop African-centered policies towards the UK, which will be driven by African, states and peoples.
And the South African president is also, well, South Africa itself is gaining a lot, from this visit. Britain signed a partnership with the UK to help South Africa in vaccine manufacturing, genome sequencing, and climate change is a deal that both sides say is a win-win. But I also remember that earlier this month, Nigeria's president, Muhammadu Buhari, was also in Buckingham Palace visiting King Charles III. Why is that visit different from what we're seeing with South Africa?
Well, first, the President Buhari's visit was not a royal state visit. So there's no basis for comparing the two, except to ask why Nigeria didn't get invited first, for a royal visit from Africa. Second, I would also look at this, if you want to even compare them in any way, I would want to also look at it more as the UK seeing Nigeria as already locked in. So no point for special treatments compared to a country like South Africa that the UK still can't really put its fingers on, its hands on, because of the diversity that I mentioned to you earlier on, which the government of South Africa doesn't really have firm control over as a result of its inclination towards democracy. So, but having said that, to answer my own question of why South Africa and not Nigeria, I must state the obvious, that South Africa has a better soft power standing than Nigeria, especially at the state-to-state level of relations between states. South Africa is better admired and has, in the last 20 years also, been better recognized than Nigeria, even within Africa and globally. So you just need to look at South Africa's membership of important global governance and multilateral platforms such as the G20, BRICS, and its regular invitations to meetings of the G7, as well as the United Nations Security Council. So this particular case of different treatments for Nigeria and South Africa is not an absolute indicator of declining relations between the UK and Nigeria. But Nigeria has been declining in stature globally for the last 10 years. And unless this is arrested, you're going to see more of these kinds of treatments, which will further underscore Nigeria as a crippled giant, as famously described by Professor Egosa Osaga in his 1998 book on the subject. And incidentally, Prof. Osaga is today director of the Nigeria Institute of International Affairs. So we have brilliant ideas on how to arrest Nigeria's paralysis as a regional leader in global politics. I mean, the externalist factors he referenced as the causal factors at the time are still present, and some of them in new forms today. If you look at the Ukraine war, Russia's war in Ukraine, and the energy and food crisis that are coming out from that, and of course, COVID-19.
Professor Christopher Isike, a real pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for joining me on Diplomatic Channel.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Russia's military sent in a barrage of rockets into Ukraine this past week, targeting the country's power infrastructure, knocking out power and breaking hearts all over with the death of a newborn baby after maternity hospital was hit.
Recent Russian missile attacks into Ukraine have caused more damage to infrastructure in Ukraine, including this maternity ward at a hospital in the city of Vilnius in southeastern Ukraine. Emergency services pulled survivors from the rubble. They said at the time of the attack, a woman with a newborn baby and a doctor had been in the maternity ward in a two-story building that was destroyed. The doctor and the mother were rescued, but the baby, newly born, died. In the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, at least 3 people, including a 17-year-old woman, were killed in airstrikes. Bodies lay in the street next to the mangled wreckage of a car as darkness fell over the snow-covered street and fire crews put out blazes in nearby buildings. At least 5 people were killed and dozens more wounded in the Kyiv suburb of Vishhorod. There have been attacks to critical infrastructure, affecting power in much of the country and further dampening the already cold start of winter. The blackouts also affected power supply in Moldova. Electricity outages were also reported in the breakaway Russian-backed region of Transnistria. It was later restored in Tiraspol. Moldova is one of Europe's poorest countries and has the highest per capita intake of Ukrainian refugees. It shares a border with Ukraine and is connected to its power grid. The electricity supply in the Ukrainian capital has been massively impaired by the ongoing conflict, with the increasing frequency of power cuts and lack of maintenance work forcing many residents to move out to the suburbs. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky appealed to the UN Security Council to take action to stop Russian airstrikes, targeting vital infrastructure that have once again plunged many Ukrainian cities into darkness and cold as winter sets in. In a video link to the council chamber in New York, he told listeners Ukraine received 70 missiles in one day.
So today is just one day, but we have received 70 missiles. That's the Russian formula of terror. This is all against our energy infrastructure. There is a hit also with the residential house damage. Hospitals, schools, transport, residential districts all suffer. The Russian terror led to a complete blackout, not just in Ukraine, but also in neighboring Moldova.
He says Ukraine was waiting to see firm reaction from the world. The Council is unlikely to take any action in response to the appeal, since Russia is a member of the UN Security Council with veto power. Zelensky called for Russia to be denied a vote on any decision concerning its actions. Russia denied its forces launched missile attacks against targets in Kyiv. The Defense Ministry spokesman Igor Konashenkov confirmed Russian missiles had struck what he said were a number of military and infrastructure targets in Ukraine, but not in Kyiv. He claimed the new destruction in Kyiv was caused by stray Ukrainian air defense missiles. Meanwhile, residents of Vishhorod, city hosting Europe's largest Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, that it continues to get shelled, including the territory of the power plant station itself. The nuclear power station has been a subject of talks between high-ranked officials. IAEA inspectors have warned against attacks on the power plant, saying the attackers were playing with fire. Later in the week, President Zelensky said power, water, and communication systems were gradually being restored to the country. In other developments, NATO Secretary General says decision whether to send Patriot air defense units to Ukraine lies with the specific nations when asked about Polish demands for Germany to pass on Patriot's unit to Kyiv. Berlin offered Warsaw the Patriot system to help secure its airspace after a stray missile crashed and killed 2 people in Poland 2 weeks ago. But Poland's defense minister later asked Germany to send the fire units to Ukraine instead.
Good to see you. Thank you for coming. My pleasure.
Meanwhile, President Zelensky received more high-profile guests during the week.
This is where we end the program this week. Thank you for watching. Don't forget, you can reach me using any of the social media handles showing on your screen. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.